about the unholy hour?
Yeah, no, I was feeling awkward because I know I came in when you were handling something sensitive. So I just kept quiet.
But you were there. Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much for showing up. Okay, let's give the floor to you. I was going to do a short introduction to everyone and then give it to you. All of you have already gotten my introduction for Professor Tan on Canvas, in the announcements, in the PowerPoints, that he's one of the most inspiring, like truly revolutionary, visionary public servants I have ever met. And I've never actually met him in person. I've only met him through like email and through Zoom. He's a veterinarian. Many of you have already read his articles about active aging with humans and dogs, and you responded to it so very movingly. He's also a medical anthropologist. He has a regular column called Pinoy Kasi in Philippine Inquirer, and he was a former chancellor of University of the Philippines, Diliman, the 10th chancellor from 2014 to 2020. But since we were talking about art, in one of the descriptions of him, he said, "My vision of University of the Philippines as a chancellor is where graduates are able to see and appreciate the poetry in mathematics, as well as the mathematics in poetry." So those of you in our class who are artists, poets, musicians, you'll love him. So without further ado, Professor Michael Tan, thank you again so much for coming.
Sure. Good morning to everyone. Well, it's morning here. Very early morning, as in it's almost midnight. And I know it's the afternoon, right? Wait, what time? Oh, no, it's 8 a.m. over at your place. So
it's 8:52 a.m.
8:52. Okay, so good morning is still fine. Let's see, wait, disabled participant screen sharing. I need to be able to share screen.
Yeah, I'm gonna make you co-host right now. I hope it works. Yeah, I've just made you co-host.
Okay.
Are you able to share your screen? Or you can also send it to me.
Yeah. Okay, I have it. You do have a copy. I sent one.
Okay, let me check again.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, do you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay. And do I go ahead with?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So good morning again to everyone, and we're straddling 2 days. It's still the 11th over there, and it's May 12 over here. But I guess we're all pretty much getting used to using Zoom. Although I did catch your exchanges there over non-participation of some of your classmates in the online session, right? That's why I said I felt so awkward. I had to keep quiet. Anyway, let's just go straight into the presentation, because we are pressured by time. Again, we want to leave several minutes for Q&A, right?
Yes.
How many? 20 minutes?
Yeah, it depends on you. Maybe we really just wanted to see you and hear your talk, and yeah.
And the total is an hour and a half or an hour?
Well, it was supposed to start at 8 and it's already 55. So the class actually ends at 9:20.
Okay.
So in another 25 minutes.
So about 25?
25 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've been on Zoom since 8. But it's fine. Go ahead and
okay.
make it interactive. Yeah.
Wait, I'm all confused now. Is it 8 over there?
It's almost 9 now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did something go wrong there? Anyway, we shouldn't waste any more time. So I got it wrong, I think. Anyway, let's just start and get into this. No, the subtitle is in Chinese, but I have it translated. It's Puwang Sin, which means to remember our origins. It's a very popular Chinese idiom. And origins is expressed as Sin, the last two letters, which means the first heart. And I think it's very appropriate in relation to conviviality because we're talking about something that starts way, way back. And I hope this will become clearer. I just needed to do a personal note here of we live in a trans age. Everything is trans, no? And I am transcultural, being ethnic Chinese, but born and raised here in the Philippines. And then very important for the presentation today is that my first degree was in veterinary medicine, and I finished in 1977, which is almost 50 years ago. So that should date me properly, and it also gives me the right to say certain things because I did see what happened. No? In terms of veterinary medicine, I teach in the vet school, one of several schools where I teach, and we continue to have the same problems of 50 years ago, which was although we were trying to be vets, we were very, very anthropocentric. You know? Everything revolved around human beings, and we still have vets who talk about dumb animals. Animals are inferior to non-human animals are inferior to humans, and this is such a big problem. It affects what we're going to be talking about, which is conviviality. I moved into anthropology after graduation. I stopped practicing for a while because, well, for many different reasons, we don't want to go into it. But I am back in vet practice. But my real love really is anthropology, and although in recent years I've realized that we've had very similar problems in anthropology, which is again still being very anthropocentric. It is I remember when I was taking my master's in anthropology, it was always referring again to lesser animals. And we're going to see in a chart here about evolution that that humans were at the top and the pinnacle, and all other species were at the bottom of the ladder. And this is all totally unscientific. I mean, so this is not being sentimental. Unless we change the way we think, unless we go back to the original heart or the first heart that we have, we will not be able to solve many of the problems that we see around us today. I'll skip the next paragraph, which is just talking about what I went into as a veterinarian and as an anthropologist. And I am non-binary. I know this is, everyone has to declare that these days. And I would love to talk more about it, but I'm not going to, because next week I have a 2-hour session about that as well. What is this? What is this multi-species conviviality? This was triggered by when COVID broke out. I'm sure you remember the early months when there were all these photographs of the world's greatest cities, and you had so-called wild animals roaming the streets. And suddenly you had people talking about the need in anthropology for multi-species ethnographies. And I was rolling my eyes because we've been doing that for years and years, because I entered something called anthrozoology maybe about 20 years ago. And we were talking about this 20 years ago, but it was because of COVID that we realized how close our proximity was to so-called wild animals. And I guess the problem was everyone was working in silos, like Konrad Lorenz and his work on imprinting and ethology, animal behavior, goes back about 80 years. But many people do not know about his work. And those who do still refer to it as animal behavior. And I think it's time that we begin to talk, as we are doing now in some of the vet schools, we talk about comparative behavior, because we are animals too. In case you're into political correctness, we tend to use now, especially in anthropology, we talk about non-human animals, and human animals. That's us, and that's really more scientifically correct. So it's not just political correctness. So I will be doing a cultural history of this multi-species conviviality, with a fairly long time span, about 45,000 years. And yet, when you think about it, that conviviality, if you go, I mean, if you go into the details, we're talking about a much longer period. Humans have been around on Earth for about, well, when I was in anthropology graduate school, we were talking about 200,000 years, but this has now been extended to about 300,000 years, which is still very recent. We're the latest kids on the block, but as you know, we're also the most spoiled kids on the block. We bully everyone else. So within the 300,000 year span, we talk about a conscious conviviality, multi-species conviviality of about 45,000 years. And I wanted to start off with rock or cave art, which you find in many sites: Spain, France, Russia, US, India. On the right is the oldest example of cave art, which is not far from the Philippines, in Sulawesi. And this is about 45,000 years ago, and it's called the Warty pig. And you see a palm print there. All over Indonesia, you do find rock art with the palm prints are very popular, and you find them also in some of the cave art in Europe. But I'm straying here. What I did want to emphasize is that cave art, which is the earliest form of representational or abstract art, often depicted animals and hunting scenes. And my point here is the cave art tells us that we were conscious of the other species around us, probably because we were hunters, but thinking about putting them on the caves represented another step. It represented a link. We were making a link to the other species around us. We find in cave art also depictions of shamanism, where people wore animal-like masks, and these were links to the supernatural. It seems that we often wanted to have the powers of animals, which represented the supernatural. In the Philippines, we've had the aswang for the longest time ever, and children are warned, especially at night, not to stray too far from the house, because if you go out, you will find the aswang, and they often take the forms of animals. And of course, there were always animals roaming around, dogs and cats and pigs. And for children, you can imagine it represented a very different world. And in a way, it wasn't very healthy because it made them fearful of animals, because they were being told that some of those animals could be the aswang. Incidentally, the aswang was made into an American film about 50 years ago, based in Wisconsin, of all states. Of course, today we talk about modern zombies, and they still represent this idea of animal-human hybrids, and they're very, very popular, in our films. Domestication has been around fairly short period. In this chart, you have dogs as the oldest domesticated animals, and they're put about 12,000 years, but more recent archaeological findings suggest that it may have been about 15,000 years. And I would not be surprised that in our lifetimes, especially in your lifetimes, we'll probably find out that dogs and human beings learn to like each other, maybe even earlier. Like I push for about 20,000 years. So you can go to the link to look at all the other animals. And I was surprised the horse was fairly recent. The rabbit is less than 1,000 years ago. And there are other stories about that, why you can eat rabbits during Lent. Again, another long story. Domestication really represented domination. It spoke of how humans looked at ourselves as being as the owners of nature, and that animals were there to be tamed and to be farmed for our needs, whether it was for food, medicine, or to be used for transport, to be used for security, and many, many more. I have a picture here on the right of bears in China being farmed so that they could extract bile from the bears, a very painful procedure. And this is still being used as medicine, despite the scientific findings that it has no medicinal value, but they continue to do that. And the COVID pandemic actually increased the demand for bear bile, and this is one of the farmed animals. There were more benign aspects, of course. We developed empathetic relationships with animals, and we speak of companion animal medicine in vet school, and emotional support animals. You can even just look at the dogs in your household and how they have over the years. And I think of my own lifetime growing up at the time when dogs were not allowed in the house. My parents always said, no, dogs are animals. They're not supposed to be with us inside the house. Of course, by the time I was a teenager, we were getting our way. Dogs had moved into the house and eventually into our bedrooms. And that was revolutionary, the idea that dogs could sleep on your beds. Not only sleep on your beds, but displace us from our beds. And yet, when you think about it, maybe centuries ago, we did sleep with our dogs in the caves as well. They provided warmth at night and provided the added security. So it's probably not accidental that domestication revolved around conviviality, learning to live with each other for mutual benefit. And it's not just dogs, of course. The cats came in to help to control rats and mice. Cats are not as convivial, but they are fun as well. And we know that, again, that when I think about what's coming out in the science journals these days, you find this conviviality being reflected. I mean, who would have thought that you'd have scientists looking into why we have puppy love? What is so appealing about dogs? It's because of their puppy eyes, which some of our boyfriends and girlfriends have as well. So you have to be very careful because they're really disarming. And the theory that goes here, and this appeared in no less than Science magazine, is that what differentiated puppies from dog puppies from wolf puppies was that there's a certain structure around the pupil of the eye which gives them this look. And that early in the process of our learning to live with animals, with dogs, is that we chose wolf pups that had that look. It was an advantage. And of course, the wolf pups that had that look were actually friendlier as well. And one of the arguments there is that the dogs actually domesticated us with the puppy look. Incidentally, the thing about boyfriends and girlfriends, it's been shown that when you have two human beings looking at each other for a prolonged period, you do develop feelings. So you have to be very, very careful about that as well. I think during COVID, we are particularly vulnerable because you will remember everyone looked good with their masks on, and the eyes had it, the puppy look. And the mask really help people to fall in love with each other, sometimes with disastrous results. Something from archaeology is that there was a report also from 14,000-year-old puppy remains, showing, and this might be a bit too technical, but they found that the puppy actually suffered from distemper, probably around the age of 19 weeks. All of you know canine distemper is a deadly disease. It's a very, very difficult disease. But this finding showed that about 14,000 years ago, someone was taking care of a puppy with distemper, which is almost impossible to treat. And the archaeologists estimate that the puppy probably died a few weeks later. But the fact that someone was caring for a puppy 14,000 years ago says a lot about the conviviality that was developing between humans and dogs. And there are similar findings that I'll be sharing in a while. Now, all throughout, we find some tension here between altruism and self-interest. COVID highlighted those tensions. Because of COVID, there's a lot of talk about zoonotic spillovers. In fact, I had to go through 3 months of international conferences. They were all online, but we were meeting scientists from several parts of the world. In Latin America, there was someone who was based near the North Pole, but we were discussing so-called zoonotic spillovers, and this is the fear that diseases could be transmitted from non-human animals to humans. And it's believed that COVID is probably one of those results of zoonotic spillovers, but everything has been so politicized. China refuses to give more information on their wildlife reserves and wildlife markets, and countries have been blaming each other for the zoonotic spillovers. But this fear of zoonotic spillovers speaks again of the tensions that we have around conviviality. I don't know how many of you were aware that in 2020 and in 2021 there was an outbreak of COVID in minks. Animal activists have been fighting very hard to get mink farming phased out, but it was going full blast in 2020. And then there was an outbreak in Denmark, and then it spread to Spain and other countries. And more than 1 million of these minks had to be culled. They were killed in an attempt to control the disease. But what is not mentioned in many of the news reports is that it started as a reverse zoonosis, meaning COVID had developed among humans, and the first outbreaks of COVID in minks were in farms, and it seems that caretakers had been infected by COVID and they passed it on to the minks. And of course, they had to be killed because there is a fear that they would then become a new reservoir that would then affect humans. So it goes back and forth. But this is an example, like I said, it's the conundrums we have here. I mean, in the first place, why do we need to farm minks for their fur, right? To make mink coats and all. And then we got to that point where we had to cull them because of COVID. The fear of zoonotic spillovers, of course, the cinematic spillovers here. And in the Philippines, we certainly have that as well. Even before COVID, there's a fascination with shokoy sightings. Joy should know what shokoys are. Shokoys are male mermaids. Every few years you'll have a report about a shokoy carcass being found in one of the seaside places. And I don't know why it's the male mermaids. The female mermaids are noted for getting sailors confused, and you have shipwrecks because of that. But the male mermaids, the shokoys, are just there. And then in the West, you have Bigfoot and Yetis, and of course the zombies. Then when you think about it, pets themselves, we love them, but there's also a fear of them. It was horrible during the early months of COVID. The Chinese were panicking. There were dogs that were thrown out of their windows from high rise. And we nearly had that in the Philippines because Lysol put out an ad and said that Lysol will protect you from COVID. Make sure to spray your pets with this. I was so furious. I had to write Lysol. I said, that's deceptive advertising. There is no evidence of COVID being transmitted by pets. I just wanted to let you know that there are two terms here that are now used in the sciences: peridomestics. These are dogs and cats and other domesticated animals that have a semi-wild status. The stray animals, for example, the stray dogs and cats are peridomestics, and a lot of research is being done now on their health because of the fear, again, of zoonosis. And cynothorps are those animals that have entered human domain. For example, rats and mice, because of again the tense conviviality that we have. They live off our garbage. So the triggers that we see here are environmental changes and the spillovers, and yet the term itself, spillover, speaks of our bias too. We keep talking about spillovers from wild animals coming into our domains, when it's actually human encroachments that have gone into non-human animal habitats that have created the problems. No? And then, of course, all these terms speak of that, of those encroachments. No? I did want to bring out the story of Yinnan's elephants, no? For several months in 2020 to 2021. Again, a herd of 15 Asian elephants, displaced again from their habitat, began to go roam through the province of Yunnan in an area of about 500 kilometers. No? And again, it was our encroachment. No? But what was fascinating here was how we humans, or the Chinese, responded. No? Here's a photograph of elephants that were napping. No? And just like with humans, you can see one of the baby elephants refusing to take its nap. But what was more fascinating here was they followed the elephants, the Chinese government, well, surveillance. You know, the Chinese are good for that. And this picture shows elephants roaming through a Chinese city at night, because they would send out warnings, and people would take the precautions as the elephant and let the elephants go through their cities. And in total, this is how many people and how much of resources were poured into assuring the safety of this very small band of elephants. That's conviviality as well. And the fact that it happened in China tells us a lot as well. This is something very recent. I emailed Joy saying that I was going through the news, and there's the terrible bombing using hypersonic missiles. And in the capital of Kyiv, the zoo stayed open, and they have been open through the last year or so with the war. They have stayed open. And they actually post things on how to protect animals, birds, reptiles, mammals, during this war, including sedating animals, because they could not bring the animals into bomb shelters. What they're trying to do now is to evacuate some of the bigger mammals to Poland and other nearby countries. Again, that's conviviality. Who would have thought that? I mean, human lives are in danger here, but the zoo has stayed open, and you have the zoo caretakers staying with the animals as well. I do worry that I hope that you will be conscious, though, that what affects conviviality are ideologies. And even thousands of years ago, our ancestors did play with this conviviality. We find rituals after slaughtering animals, offerings to nature. And anthropologists say that this reflects the guilt feelings we have. And I think many of them are Freudian here. But I see some, they do make a point. Why do we have so many rituals associated with hunting? And I think it reflects this ambivalence again. But I did want to mention the Philippines, traditionally, when you go through a wild area, we call it masukal, which means there's a lot of wild vegetation. You're required to say tabi-tabi, tabi po. Or in Ilocano, I think Joy uses Ilocano, bari-bari apo. You're saying, excuse me, I need to pass through. So we are asking for their permission to go through. Sadly, in the last few years, evangelicals have told me that to say tabi-tabi is to subject yourself to Satan. Right? So they prefer that if you go through an area, you actually shout out, in the name of Jesus. So you're invoking Jesus and telling wildlife, get out of my way. Jesus protects me. And I think this is very disturbing, because it does show how conviviality, how such concepts, the idea, well, you find liberal Protestants, for example, now talk about shared creation. The terms are changing, rather than humans being put on earth to dominate nature. For those who continue to have religious affiliations. And this idea of in the name of Jesus, I think, is going to be one of our biggest problems. I actually found that during one lecture I was giving in vet school. And one of the vets said, but Jesus will protect us. No? And you know that he said, and she said that they were put to serve us. No? And if we have problems with them, then with wild animals, then we should just start to farm them because that's what their purpose is. No? And I said, this woman is teaching in a vet school. You're creating another generation of people who won't understand what conviviality is about. Among anthropologists, we are reviewing the materials we're using. We no longer use this ascent, this march of progress, which is very anthropocentric. It presumes that Homo sapiens represents the pinnacle of evolution. And we know that's just not true. And this is amusing. One of my one of my colleagues in the Department of Anthropology brought out this material. You might want to look this up. There's a book called Your Inner Fish, and it's a biologist who points out if you really want to look for your origins, you're not going to be talking about primates. If you look at fish, fish have many of the organs that we have, the vestigial organs there. So partly tongue in cheek, they're saying that we have to look for the inner fish in ourselves, meaning we come from, we should acknowledge the links with marine life as well, the inner fish. So after class, you can go and look for your inner fish. I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but the next one is also tongue in cheek. We know about mosquitoes, and I'd like to challenge you to think on conviviality. They are a problem. We know that there are diseases that can be transmitted through mosquitoes, and modernity and urbanism have increased the risk there. Would you believe we found the tires that the poor use? They put it on roofs so the roofs don't fly off. They accumulate water, and then you have the larvae of mosquitoes, and that's why you have these outbreaks of dengue. And the response has been, of course, to spray. In the past with DDT, but today we have other things there that are used for fogging. You can look up Hygiene Theater. It's a great article in The Atlantic that came out 3 years ago. But my whole point, though, is that it may be tough thinking about mosquitoes and conviviality, but it is part of this trying to understand our relationships with other animals and their practical challenges. Can we avoid insecticides? Can we just use mosquito nets alone? And I have a funny story here because when I had an architect renovating my home, she said, do you want to use mosquito nets or do you want me to put it around your house? I said, my God, what are you going to be doing there? She said, we just put nets around the house so you won't need to have individual mosquito nets at night. And I said, does it work? She said, oh, it works very well with me and my husband. And then she told me the story. So the first night they spent in their new home, which only used external mosquito nets, at one point she slapped the butt of her husband. And the husband went, now since when did you start thinking such about wild sex? And he said, what do you mean wild sex? I slapped your butt because of the mosquitoes around us. But yeah, why not? I mean, it means that when we think of conviviality, we should be thinking about everything all the way up to conjugal or intimate relations. So conviviality is about sociality. Animal welfare programs, I like to remind you, came about in Western Europe because animals were being used, for example, to draw horse carriages. And there was this concern over growing cruelty against animals and against children, almost as an afterthought. And ironically, the problems with human relationships may have contributed to the conviviality that we see today. Why are Westerners so crazy about their dogs? Sociologists have written about it, and the rise of nuclear families, children leaving home and creating emptiness. That's why older people had to turn to companion animals, and you had this. That's how dogs got into our homes. So my point here is that conviviality, we need to think about conviviality and the tough choices that we face here, the relationships we have. And this is something I actually have these products at home. The first time I saw it, I said, goodness, what is this? You can actually buy snacks now for your pets made out of insects, crickets and others. And this is a response to the climate emergency, because to produce beef and pork and animal protein has been disastrous for the planet. And one of the solutions that has been proposed is to tap into insects. I don't know if you have them in the States. These come from Europe. And I said they are tough choices, because you can just get insects with whey, or you can get insects with rabbit, or with tuna, or with other things. And so you make your choices there. And the choices keep boiling down to remembering our origins. I hope you see the link there. I started with this and I ended with this, because really I think that humans from a very early, from the time we emerged, did have the heart for conviviality, and we've had our ups and downs, but for the sake of the planet and for the sake of human survival, I think we will have to be so much more conscious about what conviviality is, who is involved, what animal species, and let's not forget the plants as well. We domesticated plants, and there have been some problems with that too. We are relying on too few plants as food. So this is how I wanted to end it, and we can go into the Q&A. Let's remember our origins. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Tan, for such an eye-opening and powerful presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. Those of you who have to go, it's 9:20, and I know our class ends at 9:20, so go ahead. But those of you who want to stay for discussion for maybe another 10, 15 minutes, please stay. And do you have any questions for Professor Tan? Does anyone have any questions?
You can type them out on chat as well.
I'll ask a question.
Sharing, Professor Tan, do you want to end your screen sharing, or do you want to keep?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Tan. Hi. My name is Magali. I have a question about how does religion play an aspect? I ask this in almost all my classes just because I'm a little bit more interested in it. How you said that instead of saying that saying when you went into the forest, you had to announce yourself to the animals, and then the evangelist told you to say, shout in the Jesus name. How has your studies of anthropology displayed how religion has changed our views of nature, through domination?
Yeah. Of course, there are many aspects of religion that have been good for conviviality, but when you think especially about, let me take a step backward. And for example, Buddhism emphasizes that we have to respect all sentient beings, and that's why many Buddhists are vegetarian. And sentient, any species that has emotions and feelings, you would have to protect them, and that's an example of a positive effect. Unfortunately, Christianity has always nurtured, I don't even want to use the word nurtured, but Christianity has always looked at humans as being put on earth to use nature for our own purposes, and that God actually allowed us that. And really, when you look at the bigger picture, for example, I have fights constantly with my Filipino-American relatives. Many of them are Trump supporters. This is one most awful thing when you see an Asian American who supports Trump. And they, together with that, is climate change denial. They say that that's just made up by liberals, because the fact is that nature intended us to use nature, and therefore trying to protect the environment is something that is counterintuitive. And I have that newspaper column, and people are always writing in, there is no climate change. Will you stop trying to fool people there? And together with that is this notion, and I told you about a veterinarian, a colleague who's an evangelical, who also feels that all this talk about protecting animals, animal welfare, is liberal dribble. I had to control myself from using stronger words there. There is no such thing as climate change. There is no need to protect animals. They're there for us to eat, for us to use. And sometimes I think this is one of the strongest deterrents to coming up with the solutions to climate change and to promote this conviviality, which should be part also of the response to the climate emergency.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm in Mexico right now. And a lot of the things, like one of my aunts was telling me that they had a yoga place here. There's this like a related little rural town. Yoga is like something taboo. And these ladies like walked by and saw them doing like cat cow and like all of these movements. And they basically like told on this business and were saying that they were worshiping Satan. So then they closed down the yoga place. And my aunt's like, my daughter's also telling me that it's against God to practice yoga and to think Buddhist thoughts and stuff like that. And she's like, why? And I'm like, because the church wants you to be dependent on them. They want you to give them their monetary support and all of this. So I was just like wondering how this played into nature. So thank you for like sharing that. But that's kind of like, it's really sad to see like when a place is dominated by these patriarchal religions, how they like suppress people and just their freedom in general. Like she's being ostracized by even her own daughter for just stretching her body and like, you know, doing something mindful. So yeah.
Right. Well, there are actually Catholic Church directives that warn about the dangers of yoga and things that center too much on the body, and yet they include mindfulness in there as well. Mindfulness is not the body per se, but they bring that out as well. And about 50 years ago, a Catholic group of sisters actually introduced Zen Buddhism into the country, and they were very, very careful because they knew that the cardinals and bishops would descend on them for propagating such pagan beliefs. And so what they did was to say, this is Zen for Christians, and they would put a crucifix there in their sessions, and it worked quite well. But there are still a lot of fears of Zen and yoga today.
Thank you.
Okay. I think Andy had her hand raised a while ago.
Hello. Yeah, I put it in the chat, but I was interested on like hearing your journey as like a non-binary person because of like I do also identify as non-binary. So I thought it was really impactful that you mentioned it during your presentation.
It was meant to be incidental because when you think about conviviality, it's a trans thing as well. I try to emphasize in schools, for example, we need transdisciplinary approaches. And I think the gender revolution around trans people and non-binary people, these are terms, of course, which are used now. But I often, my niece, for example, who's now 30, came out recently and said that she is non-binary and she was going to have top surgery, have her breast reduced, and I said, I'm so happy that you're opening up to me. She lives in Canada, but I did tell her, 50 years ago, I lived in the Bay Area in San Francisco as a college student. I said, those words did not exist at that time, but there was a very large trans community that we had to rely on ourselves for information. There was nothing. There was one of the universities in California had I think it was UCSF that said gay people are different from transsexuals, and they had to screen out gay people. If you're gay, you cannot claim to be transsexual. You can't have the gender affirmation surgery. At that time, it wasn't called that. Anyway, and there's a lot of experimentation with the hormones. And then I came home to the Philippines, and I was just too busy with all kinds of other work. My parents always said, "Oh, you just replaced one neurosis with another," no? with political work. No? But in the last few years, I figured at my age, I'm 71. I figured that at my age, I'm entitled to to go back to some of the unfinished work I started as in the 1970s, doing hormones and all. And I have no intentions of going through surgery. I have no intentions of taking on roles as of living as a woman. No? That was around 50 years ago. No? I'm happy with my convivialities. No? I'm happy with my children. I have 5 adopted children, and they understand my crazy world. And I would like them to know that when the time comes, whatever they feel they are or should be, that there shouldn't be a problem there. But I do wish, and this is why next week I have to give a 2-hour talk to people working in sexuality. How are we going to handle the alphabet soup now of LGBT plus 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 plus? Is it really doing good for people? How do we handle the continuing biases? And it's I hope when you're my age, you will find second and third wind and want to tackle these issues, maybe things that you could not handle when you were younger. So I'm just saying here, it's fine. It's fine looking for new advocacies. We will never run out of advocacies that are worthwhile. Okay.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I was wondering that, but and that is really inspiring for my like non-binary journey as like an adult, because it's seen as more of like a younger or like a new generation sort of thing when it's always existed, I think.
Yeah. Just very quickly, but we're really straying away from conviviality. I found out something really horrible just about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, talking with my urologist, and this was in relation to prostate problems, no, and I told him, I said, it's so expensive what you charge for handling prostate surgery, and I said, what do the poor do? And he was so blunt. He said, we castrate them. You do an orchiectomy. You remove the testes, because then that stops the testosterone production, and it stops the prostate from further enlarging. And I said, what, do you have counseling programs for that? He said, well, how much counseling can you do? You will just have to tell the patient it's your balls or your life. I know it sounds horrible, but that's again part of the realities that we have in a developing country. And then meanwhile, in the States, when you neuter a dog, did you know that you can buy, I can't remember the term. It's something like neuticals. No, neuticals are after you neuter the dog. Some crazy people thought that maybe the dogs would get upset because there's nothing left in your testes. So you can buy neuticals. You insert it into the scrotum so the dog thinks it still has its balls. Okay. I don't know if it's still being produced. No? And the dogs don't really care, actually. They do care about human love, and but I don't think they care about having the neuticals. Yes, Alison. Oh my gosh, laugh out loud.
Thank you for sharing. And it's so inspiring to hear you talk about these issues, and especially about non-binary too, because I have my perspective as this young person now that like, oh my gosh, like the older generations, like they don't have these progressive ideas, and it's like harming the youth. But like seeing people like you talk about these ideas gives me so much hope, and it makes me so happy to hear that you're learning about these things and talking to young people about these ideas too. And there's a lot, I'm very active in the whole animal activist type of realm, and you've talked about a bunch of ideas that I've never even heard of before yet. So like it's great that you're sharing all of these like ideas, especially outside of the US, like how animals are being viewed and treated in other areas outside of the US especially. And it's hard for me to think or to believe that we're heading in a positive direction for these positive relationships with animals and our relationships with them. So how do you think are the best ways to help transform people's respect and relationship to animals?
I think we need more stories from people, and in the Philippine setting, for example, to bring out the stories from rural areas. I mean, it's always presumed that kindness, animal welfare is something that's associated with cities and with the middle class. They're always saying, oh, the middle class, they're crazy people. That's why they treat their dogs that way. And yet, when I was a student and I was working in rural areas, I was always, I was so touched by how people in rural areas, they have their convivialities. Now, when you look at the pets that are kept in their homes, you have what we would call wild birds that they had tamed, and it's not like they were chained; they were flying around the houses and all. I don't know, Magali might have seen that in Mexico too. Our definition of pets
behind me. My grandma hasn't mastered conviviality very well. She keeps a lot of wild birds.
Yeah.
I was just showing them, she has peacocks, and my grandpa used to open the cage because he felt so bad, and he's not here anymore. So my grandma just gets to keep her birds now because he used to open the cages and be like, go free. And I'm resisting the urge so bad. Like I cried because I was doing my homework here and I was watching the bird just pace back and forth. And I was just like, he should be like flying free, but I can't do that to my grandma because it's her bird,
And your grandfather isn't around to do the liberation, yeah. But yeah, those stories would be important to bring in. And the term, I use the term narrative. Just remind you that during my presentation, we're only starting to do that in schools. The fact that we're still teaching anthropology, we're still teaching veterinary medicine without a scientific understanding of the potentials in our relationships with non-human animals. I mean, who would have thought that in my university, we actually have a full program for emotional support animals. We have a whole army of emotional support animals. Several of them are retired from the uniformed services, the police, working with the police and with the soldiers. And especially during midterms and final exams and term papers, we open a whole dormitory to students, whether they live in the dorms or not. They get to use the place 24/7. They have free Wi-Fi, they have free coffee and snacks and all. And they get their emotional support dogs. It's just so amazing watching them being able to hug the dogs in between their review classes. And I think we've made a difference there for a whole slew of mental health problems. Yeah. I hope you see SD do you have emotional support animals on campus? You do have them?
Yeah, there have been some times where during right before finals week or something, they'll be like, we have a dog at this place this week, come to us and pet the dog.
Yeah, it's good to know.
I think Mateo has had his hand up too. These are amazing questions.
Yeah, I was really interested in your background as an anthropologist because I've read a few books about that, and it's just always interested me kind of how we've developed into the strange species that we are now. And I was curious what is your idea of when and how we started to think so anthropocentrically, and why now we're starting to change those ideas?
I'm not sure we can explain when we started being anthropocentric, because again, from conviviality, if you look at animals, non-human animals, they're not species centric. You don't look at dogs thinking of dogs as being better than all the other species around. But maybe precisely because we are, our thinking and our rationality created some of these really irrational things. And we are probably the most species-centric creatures on Earth, and we draw boundaries all the time, which is why we're constantly in warfare. We're very, very destructive, and this is because we are unable to look outside of the boundaries that we have created. So besides being centered on our being human beings as superior, we talk about our affiliations, our ethnic affiliations, our race, and think that we're always better than the others. And that is something, and that's why I think the conviviality with other species is going to be a major step in trying to overcome sexism, racism, and all the other isms there. Yeah. And I like to think anthropology is contributing to that, but I'm more hopeful about transdisciplinary courses like this course that you're taking right now. That's probably the way to go. Not just to say anthropologists are great at doing this. We need to bring everyone else in. Yeah.
Ari, you had a question as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is talked about a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to say also that I have a lot of admiration for, it's really inspiring to see other non-binary people in academia working with the environment, especially who are older. And I feel like in a lot of my classes, not just, although a lot of them, sorry, it's kind of hard to phrase, but like a lot of the time when we talk about environmental studies and gender, I feel like a lot of the discussion is very binary. Things like men, the patriarchy, are destroying the environment, women are defending the environment, women have this specific relationship with nature. And then also even outside of environmentalism, like in a lot of my humanities classes, a lot of the discussion is always in very binary terms, and not even just with gender, even with other things in the environment. It's always, a lot of people say things like, well, there's kind of two camps. It's humans who want to destroy the environment and humans who want to leave the environment alone. So how do you think we can try and incorporate a broader type of discussion that isn't so focused on these kinds of like two like opposed kind of viewpoints?
Well, maybe it's this non-binary thing in gender spilling over into our discourse around the environment. It does not have to be just those two options. I looked at the readings that were assigned to your class, and they're very good. They interrogate the arguments that are being bandied right now. For example, the idea that that the wilderness and humans, the debate over that's a very important debate as well. I mean, is the solution to get rid of the humans? And my viewpoint there is that it's not a matter of getting rid of humans. We would probably get rid of ourselves anyway at the rate we're going. And it's also a given. It's also a given that we live in a world where there are human beings, 8 billion of us, and that's where we take off. Now, how are that 8 billion? I know it sounds like a cop-out if we say that the 8 billion will have to learn to live with all the other species there. But that is a fact. We have to think about that, and that's why we change the narratives. It's good that we have classes like this one in San Diego, and we're always looking for other classes in our University of the Philippines system to bring this in, these issues, as well as the other issues that are important today, around gender and sexuality, for example. Because would you believe there are people in our university, we are the state university, who believe that gender and sexuality should not be discussed in a government institution. I think you can guess who those guys are. They're the same people who oppose family planning, who oppose sexuality education. They said, we can take care of that. It should be left to parents. Yeah. A lot of it is copied from the States. Sadly.
Yeah, no, that's another thing I've seen. I mean, I don't know if you heard, but there's a woman in Florida who's a teacher who is potentially going to lose her job or be prosecuted because she showed a movie that had a gay character in it to a classroom of children.
And it was a Disney movie, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, but thank you. It's really nice to kind of have these sorts of discussions with people about how we can kind of try to expand the discussion to other points of view.
I think
it's almost
Mateo has a post here, and I think it's important. Going back to the ideas of Zen, I think it's an interesting idea which helps escape the binary way of thinking. The non-duality, certainly it is at the heart of mindfulness programs and of Buddhism as well. I'm not trying to promote Buddhism itself. I run a Buddhist school as well right now, but none of the students are Buddhists, which is telling you a lot about. I accepted the position there on the condition that they are not trying to push any particular faith. Yeah.
I hate to, interrupt, but
It's
almost 10. It's almost 10, and I know that it would now be like 1 o'clock your time or 12.
Almost 1, yeah.
Almost 1. So we want to let you get some sleep, but thank you so much again for the enlightening, really brilliant critical discussion, and it's recorded, so there are people who weren't able to join because it's past midnight, can watch it. And also thank you to all of you who stayed and asked such critical, powerful questions. If you could join me in just thanking Professor Tan and just expressing our sincere appreciation.
Thank you so much.
Professor Tan.
Thank you.
Thank you as well for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. This means so much.
Share this, and I hope you will have in your lifetime many more dialogues of this type, and that you might lead some of those dialogues.
Yeah, I hope so. This has been a really inspiring class. So I picked 8 o'clock so that it would eliminate all the ones who are kind of I don't know. And I was so shocked because the first day they were there at like 7:45, and then it continued like that. They'd be there really early in the morning, 30 minutes, 15 minutes before class, and it's been really, really energizing and uplifting and inspiring, and having you in this class means a lot to us. I know they have a lot of questions because they're fascinated by your work in social movements, having been a chancellor. Mateo has questions about what it means to be a transformative leader, and but I know that it's also almost 1. I think I set the Zoom to just 2 hours, and we don't want to overextend. So I think maybe we should just wrap up and say thank you. And if you want to stay in touch with Professor Tan, that's his email. So you can email him.
I can't guarantee prompt replies there, but I do get around. Yeah.
Once again, thank you, and thanks to everyone. And
have a good day.
Good night. Good night.
And I'm going to have a good night. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Professor Tan.
I will leave now, right, Troy?
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, hope to see you someday. Okay, bye. Sige, salamat din.